Morning. This is Abe Nadimi, reporting here from the Kinetic Thunderdome, which is, I think, what Stephen lovingly refers to this crazy place.
I mean, outside now, it definitely is.
Yeah, so I've heard that we're going to get smashed today at about 4 o'clock.
Thunderstorms, hail, all of it.
Big hail. Welcome to Texas. Hello. That's how we roll here.
We just wait 5 minutes and it'll go away.
So yeah, actually, TNG asked if I was going to come home early because of the storm, and I was like, well, "What are you talking about? What kind of storm we're going to have?" And sure enough, it's apparently going to be pretty epic. So, anyways, I'm Abe Nadimi. This is the Kinetic Experience. I'm here only today with the one and the only Stephen Paul Ellis.
I mean, you basically what you're saying is this is my show.
Yes, that's good.
Excellent.
I wasn't quite ready for that attitude, so now I feel like I got caught off guard. So obviously here we're missing the lovely Miss Emily Francis, and of course, Jannica.
Right.
So today we actually thought of changing it up a little bit and having a conversation around what Stephen and I really love discussing, which is strategy.
Yep.
And strategic planning. So I'm excited for this conversation because I think this is going to be one of the more interesting conversations that we've had around here recently, because we're not actually centered on the wealth wheel this time.
Well, I mean,
I don't want to say more interesting, I'm sorry, but it's different because we have obviously been centered around the wealth wheel. I mean, so Sean, Mr. House, good to see you on here on Facebook. And my Tangi's mother is online also, Miss Janice. How you doing, Miss Janice? So on strategic planning, this is something that Stephen and I really enjoy talking about, and it's just natural because the way our minds work, the analytical side of us kicks in, and then as we go to plan our business and our relationships that we're having with people, potential partnerships, right?
And life. And
well, just everything.
Yeah. Well, and what's the adage? Failing to plan is planning to fail. And that doesn't always mean that it needs to be super highly structured.
That's right.
Because a lot of people, depending on where you were introduced to the idea of planning, sometimes it takes different forms, right? So some people are like, my version of planning is I must write everything down in a notebook and then put bullet points next to it, and then that is my plan, which that is that one type of planning. And then there are some people that their idea of planning is then, I need to go and put together a vision board and have, all of these different pieces that visually tell me what exactly am I planning to do, and then the connective tissue is kind of the nebulous part. So planning is as long as you kind of know the basic structure, it's something that you definitely can adapt to your particular learning and then working style.
So are you familiar with different analytical tools for understanding and modeling your strategic planning, things like the SWOT analysis or the Eisenhower square?
I'm familiar with it, but it wasn't taught to me specifically that way.
Right. I think it's something that, if anything, we inherently kind of do. But I think some of these tools are really interesting. I'm going to find here the Eisenhower square, and this is around planning. So let me grab open image new tab. Let me grab this link. I'm going to drop this in here for everybody. So both here on Facebook and also those that are tuning in via Twitch. Ace Platinum's back. How are you doing? My computer has a hard time showing live stream on so many different screens, it seems like.
Well, that's because you're working off of basically a surfboard.
A what?
It's like a surfboard with a chip on it. It's the barest minimum.
It's highly offensive.
It's not you, it's Vivo.
This is not Vivo, this is a Lenovo.
Oh, that's just spyware.
No, it's not spyware. What are you talking about, spyware?
There was a story, So there was a study done a couple years ago, and Lenovo, because Lenovo was owned by a Chinese company, and they found that Lenovo laptops were being shipped with reporting tools that were sending things back to the servers in China. Now we just call it Amazon, but that was before Alibaba was public.
Now we refer to it as Alexa.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's awesome. That's so bad. Yes, definitely. My computer's gone full-blown crash mode. What that means is that we're going to continue being able to stream. I just won't be able to comment. So right now, and I'm going to restart this computer while we're at it here.
Yeah.
So Stephen, what is the question that we got asked here on Twitch? I can't even read it.
It was who are the people in the background, because Ace is good at creating scenarios and stories for visual.
Yes.
So we have the slideshow that's rolling in place of one of the host panels, and so he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna guess those people."
Okay, so the Eisenhower Matrix is Eisenhower Square. Did you see that? I dropped that into.
Right. Yeah. So it's got 4 quadrants, and it's called do, which is urgent now, decide, schedule time to do it, delegate, who can do it for you, delete, eliminate it. And then there's a couple of tangents: urgent, not urgent, important, not important. So that's a real tactical decision-making square. The interesting part about that is so for the way that I was taught for strategic planning is that you take every element of what you currently know about a situation. You apply a square like this to it, you decide where its priority is, and then you shift its importance from like need to happen super long term, and like where is it in relation to accomplishing the goal? Or does it totally change what the goal is?
Okay, you said something earlier. You said what I know about a situation.
Yes, because you can never know everything.
I think I kind of do sometimes. I'm just joking.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so also known is that is, would you consider that as a constant, or would you consider that as a fact, a data point?
The square or the knowns?
You said the things that you know about a topic. So I think it's
data points,
right. So I think as you go to approach a topic, right, you think I have to think to myself, what do I believe is a law, right? In this case, a physical law or an economic law, things like that, right? What do I believe is a data point that I believe, it's just a data point,
right? Something that can inform one way or the other.
That's right. And then I start putting variables in place. So one of the data points that I use when I create strategic anything is essentially is understanding motivation. Understanding motivation and understanding what is the desired outcome of both myself and the entity, the partner, the person that I'm with. What's in it for me and what's in it for them. And I think that's hypercritical as we go to create anything, because from even at the development of a product mode, it is related to what's in it for the client.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. And I think a lot of times business owners will lead conversations with, I want the client to experience this, or I want to have this, and I want to give that. Right. I don't think the client cares at all. Because from their perspective, it's what's in it for them.
Yes.
So you get these people like, oh, this person reached out to me and they want to invest in my company. Why? Why now? What are you actually doing? If it's, right? Well, because they really like me. Possibly. Right. But if that's really not something that there's a lot of evidence of in the past, right? Why is it showing up now? These are like simple questions, but they're all around motivation. And I think that's really important to understand any kind of strategic planning. Right. Period. Like, what is the motivation? Go ahead.
And even tactically, what is the motivation for this specific thing in point in time? Like, am I waiting on a call because this call is very important to what I want to do in the next 5 to 6 weeks, 2 to 3 days, 2 to 3 minutes, or am I going to go and get some coffee and walk around and leave my phone on my desk because it's not important, right? Like, those are all tactical decisions that are very momentary, but they still use the same paradigm. Like, who, what, when, and why, motivation, urgency, importance.
Absolutely.
Risk tolerance.
So what are other things that you think of as you set up a framework? I mean, this is kind of a hard question to ask because it's like, can you tell me how you think? Yeah. Right? And that's not an easy question necessarily to answer, right?
You mean to answer quickly or just to answer in general?
Well, both.
Because then there's a qualifying question.
Well, I think one of the best conversations I had with you that I like to actually reference before a lot It's like, and I say, I enjoyed this. Steven's like, which one is this? Do you remember which one it was? It was right at the very beginning when we started working together.
Oh, what are we doing conversation? Yeah.
So Steven, I had an idea because Steven and I met at this event called House of Genius. Am I right?
Yep.
And this was an event that's happening in Dallas, and well, actually it happens in a bunch of different places, right? Different parts of the city.
It's spread out all over the world now.
Right, it's a big deal. So Steven and I worked on that team, and we had an idea around what is a way that we would do the event differently. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
And so in that event is when we started talking about how we would attract more people to the event, or how we would leverage the event, and so forth, so on.
Right.
So that event ended up closing down. The Dallas founder of it decided that she didn't want to continue it, and so that event ended up closing down. So what ended up happening with us is that I thought we could create what you and I had always talked about. Here is the event for the Kinetic Experience, which is really around bringing a panel of experts together, right? Mm-hmm. So that a few businesses could come up and get live help on their businesses in front of an audience. So they would get legit live help from panelists on their business that were actually brought in and curated around the topic that these companies needed help with. So the companies had to be post-revenue, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. So the companies had to be post-revenue, and obviously that means usually startup mode, and to some capacity, right? So they probably don't have access to a big, deep pool of different advisors and whatnot. Hey, good morning, Donatas. Thanks for tuning in, bro. My computer just fired back up, so I'm just seeing your comment. So anyway, so what happened is Steven and I get together, and we have a conversation about recreating this event inside of the Kinetic Experience. And one of the strategic reasons for that was to be able to bring around a lot of different Dallas-based experts and thought leaders, have conversations with them about what we look to build, and also be looked at as a resource for the companies that were going through the program. We're going through this live event, right? So Steven and I are working, and he's coming over a lot, and he's doing a lot of work. And finally we have a conversation, which is, what are you doing here, Steven? What are we doing together? Because I knew Steven is hyper strategic. So I'm like, why are you here?
Yeah.
You're not one of those people that just floats around trying to figure out life. Like, you know exactly why you're doing what you're doing.
But I am figuring out life.
Well, I know that, but it's very intentional. That's probably the better word I want to use, right? It's very intentional. So my whole conversation is like, but why are you here? I'm not paying you to do any of these things right now. We're still building some of these concepts. We're still figuring things out. We had a really great conversation, and I think that was what was important. It's like, what are you looking to get out of this? What am I looking to get out of this? Rather than a lot of times people get together and they just start having conversations. And my story is that without having these kind of deep conversations, those type of relationships or those types of engagements end up creating an issue later on, because there's never a clear discussion as like, what is my needs and wants, and what is my motivation for having these conversations? Yeah,
it's the mismatched expectations.
Yes, a lot of mismatched expectations.
Yeah. So Ace said his opinion on strategic planning is that it's essential to any type of organization that has a vision in mind or a willingness to achieve goals. And we looked at from all angles and dimensions. One dimension, strategic plan, is not a strategic plan. It's strategic plan, plenty of thought put into it. It's at least 4 dimensions, right? And I would agree with that, because
So 4 dimensions, what does that mean?
So, well, if you take it in the classic sense, you have space, time, depth, volume, right?
Okay.
So if you're doing a strategic plan, you need to think about what type of space you're working in, and that can be like, is your strategic plan internal to your organization,
right,
or is it external to the market you're trying to serve, right? And no matter what type of business you're in, no matter what type of activity you're doing, you have a market. And then time, is this a 2-year? Is this a 3-year? Is this a 6-month? Is this a 4-week plan? Like, what is the time length being applied to it, right? Then what is the depth? Is this something that is supposed to affect every single part of the company? Is it just one division? Is it just 2 people? Is it a team? Is it a client, customer relationship? Like, what is the plan around that? And then volume. Is it supposed to happen for 1 person, 50 people, 150 people? If you want to reach 1 million people, you make a completely different plan than if you're trying to reach 5. So like that's how I categorize the 4 dimensions of like a decent strategic plan. Anything else that is only taking one of those dimensions or 1 or 2 of those dimensions into effect is more of a tactical action plan, not a strategic plan.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do you, what's the next comment here?
So yeah, Ace says, for small organization want to grow, they need to think and dream big, whereas something well established has less pressure in regards to putting a shit ton of planning. Well, of course, they must work on maintaining, increasing their success, but they're under less pressure to be discovered, known, as they already have that part down.
So I think that's really critical. I think what I'm hearing too here is that sometimes we can overplan, or
Yes.
Right.
So decision paralysis, right? That is a known affliction of people at different stages of any type of venture, right? It can be internal, you could be working for a company and have decision paralysis, or it can be external, where you could just be overwhelmed with choices or something, right? And it can happen personally, it can happen in business, but it's the idea that if I don't take I can't be wrong if I don't take the action. So if I'm always waiting to make the decision, then I technically haven't risked anything.
which is interesting because what I have been trying to incorporate into my DNA is that inaction is an action.
You said that inaction is an action?
Absolutely.
Yes, it is an action.
So what I'm like, well, if I don't publish this, I can't get criticism, I can't figure out I'm a bad writer, blah, 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 right?
Right.
So that is why I won't do an action because I'm afraid of the repercussions, and that'll get you in the analysis paralysis mode, right?
Right. Which is
But if I also
the action.
Exactly. Of failing to publish. So this is the other side of that is now I am choosing or I'm making a decision to not publish, to not put out work, to not try, to not show my effort and so forth. So.
Yeah. Which is funny, someone made a meme about that.
What do you mean?
There's a meme on it's on the internet. There's this guy that's like doing the whole like head pointing thing, and he's like, you can't screw something up if you never put something out. And then it's kind of the idea. It's like the idea of solving like world hunger, right? You can do a lot of work solving world hunger and never actually complete that because someone will always be hungry somewhere. But
wow, that's a good conversation in and of itself. So for example, and I am not implying this specifically. Well, you know what? I'm going to pick on one company. I'm going to pick on Tom's Shoes. Okay. They're huge. They're fucking huge. So when Tom's Shoes came out, and the thing was, if you buy one pair of my shoes, I will give one pair of my shoes. I thought, okay.
Yeah.
But why? Why this method? Right? Okay. So anyways, that was just a data point that I was like, I love the story, right? Because it's an immediate, pulls your heartstrings.
Yes. It's like, oh, we're doing something good. Like everything that I look at, like when you look at Tom's on your feed, you're like, I know that this is something that directly impacted someone else.
I can imagine some little kid running around on, dirt floor houses with some shoes on now. You know, sounds amazing. But why? What is the fucking motivation here? Is it truly to cause help, or is it to increase profits, right? So as I thought through that, I was again going through what is the incentives. Mm-hmm. And later on, I found out, so if the real goal is, the stated goal is the real internal goal, then it's obvious by all the further actions that an individual or a company has.
Yes.
And I think that's really important, right?
Yes.
So if the stated conversation is, we're going to help put shoes on the feet of people around the world, that should be the goal. It is not directly tied to the shoes because the profit margins in the shoes are substantial.
Yes.
Anybody who has ever looked at or bought a pair of Tom's shoes, let me guarantee you that the total all-in cost on those shoes is less than $4.
Yeah.
100%, right? And that's fine. They can charge $400 for it. All I care. It doesn't matter. However, so what they're saying is buy a $50 pair of shoes. We'll donate $4, right? Yeah. But it's out of their own shoe. So versus going down to a country and saying, we have now the resources to give away 100,000 shoes.
Actually, that was what they did, and that was actually the problem.
No, that's not what they've done.
Well, no, it's not. They didn't give away that many shoes.
It's not the giving away part. Hold on.
Right.
If they really wanted to do this, they would turn around and go to the countries and say, we need here is now money. I have the resources. I have an agreement with my stakeholders, essentially, my customers, my shareholders, that we're going to provide these shoes. We need to provide these shoes in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So fucking use the factories in the local community,
Yes.
create the fucking jobs,
Yes.
and all of a sudden people would have been able to move forward with more in a more powered state. So what we've done instead is what the company does is they take the shoes over there and they dump them on a fucking economy. So if there was a dude that was already converting water bottles, plastic water bottles, throwing some string on it and calling it a shoe,
And selling it.
and selling them and creating some amount of an economy for himself and for his city, eventually getting employees and paying rent, he's out of a job.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
He's
He's
out
out
of
of
a
a job. He's out of a business, and
Yes.
people are out of jobs. And so I think that's really important in understanding incentives is what is actually happening to the individuals that are on the receiving end of whatever quote unquote strategic plan is being either presented to you or whatever. So being part of that ecosystem is you're part of supporting that strategic plan. And there's so many companies that are doing that buy one, give away bullshit instead of, and it should be buy one, give away. So if I want to solve, buy my pair of my glasses, and I will make sure some kid in some country that can't afford them, or in the United States that can't afford them, then take that money and empower somebody, and all of a sudden you can actually stand up an economy because you're bringing in tons of money. So what instead Tom's Shoes did is they not only gave away the money, but they sourced that from different factories around the world, paid the price properly. All that money would go into those economies, right?
Right.
Those economies could turn around and then provide shoes even into the local area.
So
So I'm just throwing some examples. Let's say they move a factory to Zaire in Africa, and from that factory in Zaire, they fulfill orders for around the world now because all of a sudden this company's ramped up. It can actually produce
So that's called,
pretty epic.
That's actual economic development versus PR development. And that is actually what happens it's not a Reformation cult, but it does come out of the missionary idea where like we need to go and help the poor savages, right? So, oh my God, somebody doesn't have shoes. We need to make sure everyone has shoes, and then, throwing out all of these shoes and stuff, not thinking about what's the actual ramifications and like carry on effects of that, right? Because things are so isolated to like what is going to happen immediately, right? That's why you see poverty tourism happening.
Okay, 1 second. I got some feedback that the
Yep.
audio is low. I don't know if it's still low, but just can you guys double check?
It's the same as yesterday.
Yeah, we haven't changed the level. So,
Yeah, and that was actually reported from Facebook, just for the record. That was
So-
not coming out.
So Facebook has its own volume control. So if you for everyone on Facebook, if you set your volume to a specific volume for watching other movies, it will be transferred over to the live stream. So if you made it low when you're watching at home, it's going to be low now.
Then Jannica is watching right now on Facebook. If you give some feedback on the audio, Jannica. And on Ace Platinum, yesterday she was wearing shoes, I believe. Jannica was wearing shoes yesterday in our live stream.
I don't want to be.
But very, very, very uncommon for her to actually have shoes on sometimes in the office. Especially as summer comes around and she can wear sandals. Those shoes come off immediately and she walks around her office barefoot. So
Yeah.
anyways.
That's interesting because my sister likes like being barefoot and like being closer to the earth and stuff. I'm just like, I'm a shoe plus socks person no matter what. Like I don't even like ankle socks.
That's pretty funny.
And I also don't like shorts.
Wow, even at home?
Yeah. Well, sometimes more at home.
So like
yeah,
at home, I wear no clothes.
For the most part, no.
It's not one of those guys.
It's jeans.
Yeah.
They're just-
Really?
Yeah.
Jeans?
Yeah.
Jeans are not lounging around clothes for me, by the way. I can't stand them.
It's totally lounge for me.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So going back on the strategic planning and strategic thinking type of setup, I think that's where what we enjoy working through an issue is understanding what is going. I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe it because it's just what we do. We lay out. Well, this is what I know. This is what I don't know.
Yep.
Okay, this is how I would go about. Go ahead.
This is what I know. This is what I don't know. And then, what do I need to accomplish? And do I know enough to be able to feasibly accomplish that goal, or do I need to go learn a bunch of things to acquire the knowledge to feasibly accomplish that goal?
Or yes, that's a good way to say it too. It's also to theorize what the goal, how you'd go about solving the goal,
Yeah.
and colliding that really with a framework, right, of other things that we've seen done or other things,
Yeah.
right. So if somebody all of a sudden pops into your life and wants to start working being a partner, you have to really think about why.
Well, I automatically would say no. And
Why?
Because
Exactly.
in my life, in my paradigm for partnerships in business, you do not get to be a partner because you showed up. You get to earn the right to be a partner. So and actually we have this, with the firm, whenever we're trying to figure out like what are we going to do, why is this relationship important? We have a scorebook that says, all right, here are the things that we've done inside of the relationship with either the person that's bringing this partnership or this company. Was it positive or not? What type of value did it generate? What were we able to learn from it? What were we able to contribute? And then does that make sense to continue, right? And it's only through a series of engagements, it would, at least for what right now, only through a series of engagements can we move to a full partnership. You cannot make you can't paper a partnership and then figure out if the engagements are going to work. Because in a lot of cases, that's a lot of work for nothing, because you find out by engagement number 3, this is cool, but not super valuable. We don't really need to work closely together. A couple things happen, great, some deals are won, and now we can go about our separate ways, as opposed to now we're joined at the hip and we got to figure out how to make the rest of these things work. And I kind of don't
that's
really like that
a beautiful
style.
conversation.
Yeah.
The understanding the strategy behind a partnership, a one-time collaboration, or collaboration type of an arrangement, and a partnership.
Yep.
And that's a really important conversation because
But all partnerships break down into a series of collaborations that have been agreed upon. So it's like dating. You kind of want to go on a few dates before you figure out if you want to marry somebody.
A few?
I mean, at least a few. Yeah.
We're recommending muchos.
I mean, yeah, but that's, you see like in mergers and acquisitions, a lot of times if it's a merger, it's companies that have been working together for a while, either as customer client or client to client, or subcontractors on specific work, and then they're like, yeah, let's figure out if we can join forces, right? An acquisition is cool. You have something I want. I don't care about the rest of it. I'm going to buy you, right?
Which all of a sudden impacts what exactly?
The acquisition,
The culture.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's all of these other elements that
unless
come
you're
in.
just buying pure technology, and even when you're buying pure technology, it's going to impact the culture of the people, because it's two different groups of people coming together, or the methods that you use, or even just the perception that you have in the external marketplace, right? Because the minute you buy another company, then people are going to be like, those customers now have to look at you as the company, or if you change. It could be a name change or a name merger or whatever, but it's like, okay, now this is kind of a new entity. Like, what does this mean for me as a customer? Do I still want to engage with this company?
That's perfect. So I think a lot of times one of the what happened?
Ace goes 3 dates in 3 weeks, and then you pop the question. Yeah.
3 dates in 3 weeks. That's awesome. I'm just imagining Steven showing up to a pool party with his family, assuming he has a wife and kids. Steven is childless.
I am,
not that we know of, anyways. Is that true?
No, it's totally.
Okay.
I do not have any children.
That you know of.
No, I have no children. I know for sure I do not have any children. That is
because that little son of a bitch would be in here 100% plotting the world with you right beside your in a little suit and a little briefcase.
So that, and then also like, I'm not a standard person, so I ran a cost-benefit analysis as to what would happen.
Hold on. What'd you just say?
I'm not a standard person.
What does that mean?
So
I ran a cost-benefit analysis. So this goes to strategic planning and
Yes.
strategic thinking. So please tie all that together.
Cost-benefit analysis for what it would mean to have kids outside of a planned time frame, right? Because it's not really about whether or not you're married. It doesn't really matter if it's just, are you ready to have a child? Are you ready to make a commitment to a kid for 18 years, right? Minimum. What does that mean for your finances? What does that mean for your life? What does that mean for the opportunities? And I pretty much figured out around 18, I was like, you know what? Between 18 and 35, I probably don't want children. I'm not ready to make that type of commitment. So that being the premier value proposition, no. There is nothing that's going to happen there. And especially if I was dating someone and I was like, yeah, I don't want to have kids with you, not going to take any chances.
That is the beauty of strategic planning, is that it's very quick. In his case, I would imagine.
Yeah.
as you go to plan out the future, it's very quick for you to now judge engagements based on that. So you meet someone who, I mean, I know you're in a relationship now, but you meet someone who's like, I really plan on having kids in the next 9 months, and you're like, crashes against my strategic plan.
Yep.
I have no new data to change my strategic plan.
Right. Like, what new about this relationship introduced something that would make me alter this plan? Because like it will happen. And actually, you set yourself up for massive amounts of failure if you believe that it'll never happen, that you'll never change your plan.
Right.
Like if I was like, I will never have a reason to have kids, I can't say that. That would be completely retarded. Because maybe at some point, maybe next year, I like, you know what? Things have changed and I can have children.
Yes,
right?
new data, new
data.
circumstance,
Yeah.
new paradigm. Really, really important. But that's really awesome is I think people that are really strategic like that, they tend to be able to validate their decision making against a very simple but complex, well thought out plan versus
Which means you can take action fast.
100%. But it also means that it helps you regulate your emotional responses to things.
Yeah. Like you're not dealing with new input and then parsing that input and then figuring out how to relate to it and then also express that to people all in the same moment.
So in my case, my way to regulate that is I have to give time to any decision that I'm making usually. Because I can get emotionally excited about a decision, right?
So for you always need to take the contract home.
I always need to take the contract home.
Yep.
And what this is actually something that Jannica, I worked with, first time I heard of human design was through our buddy AJ. We actually interviewed him on the Becoming Da Vinci show, I think episode number 4 or 5, something like that. His name is AJ Amix, he's super awesome. Anyways, but this is something that Ms. Jannica has really dived deep into, which is this concept of human design, which is a whole like epic system. And it really helps you to understand how you can make decisions, how best to live your life based on the way you're designed, right? And so my human design decision thing is that I need to ride the emotional wave. So that what that means is that...
Did you make a decision after the wave was done?
I make the decision after the wave is done because I'll get an immediate like, nope, or yes, right? And either way, it doesn't matter because that's like data. Then I have to wait till my emotional state has calmed back down and then see where I am analytically still.
So
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It totally makes sense because my mom is similar to that. So like every time she has a contract for real estate, I'm like, take the contract home. And I was like, and also you're gauging the other person on the other side. So if they don't want you to take it home and they want you to make a decision right then, there's probably something wrong with all of that, right? But same way, she's like, she's great at finding sales and deals and everything else. And so, but part of that is because she also gets really excited finding sales and deals. And so it's like, work through some things, and when it's a lot of money at risk, you should take it back just 24 hours gap and then come back and see if you also are still excited about this idea and then go forward.
Some people can do that. Now, I'm going to make sure that I'll state it this way. I am not implying that everybody should be making decisions in this style. I remember watching a Grant Cardone thing on Instagram, and the way he did is he drove up, he had already had some data on this apartment complex, right? He already had some ideas of what's going on. But apparently drove around it, went through one apartment's like, I'm going to buy it, and he walked off. And apparently his real estate agent or the other side, whatever, called like, you can't fucking do that. He's like, what are you talking about? You can't show up here like a hot shot and just decide you throw it around $40 million. He's like, why not? I wanted to buy it. It's done.
Does he have it?
Yes.
I know. I'm saying like
that's the whole point, was that my decision-making process does not have to collide with the way you make decisions. My decision process is all the numbers checked out. I like what I saw. I'm ready to go. Let's go. You want to take 5 weeks to make a decision. So all of a sudden it became this paradigm.
That's like me buying a car.
Okay. So how do you probably buy a car?
I do my research on the car that I want to buy, right? I do my research on the pricing for the region, for the area. And then once I have those two numbers, and I found, like something of a deal that, because people post online, hey, we have this car at this price. So I'm like, okay, I know these numbers, right? I know that you have something in this range because you posted this. I also know you want to negotiate, right? That's what car salesmen want to do.
Sure.
But when I walk in, my test is, all right, you had this car posted online for this price, this colors, this set, this trim package. I need that or something equivalent. If you come back with something equivalent, I want to buy this today.
Because you already have made your decision.
I have already made my decision. What I'm asking them to do is to validate that I should buy it from them.
That's very important for anybody watching this. So we can actually grab this excerpt later for Instagram or whatnot. So your car buying process is you have already made your research at home.
Yep.
You've already checked out everything at home. You've probably done all the virtual tours possible. You've read the car and driver and whatever.
Yeah.
So you already know what you're getting into.
I know the stats on what I want to buy. I know the product.
Do you look at resale values as a way to understand whether you should buy new or buy off the lot private?
So resale value and also maintenance history.
Okay.
So
So you have all of this data going into your decision. So now what you do at the the dealership is what exactly? What is the reason that you walk into that particular dealership?
Because, so usually I try to find a place that's no haggle or has really great service packages. So for instance, like Sewell here in town, they do Lexus and I think they do Mercedes and some other stuff. But their family of dealerships has really, really great customer service relationships. They take care of their people, right? So I'm not so much worried about a specific car from them. I just want to find a car inside of the price range I want, but I want the dealership service package.
Got it.
So they've already done the brand work to sell me on why I should buy from them. I just need to find a product that fits into what I want to get, right? And I don't want to have 15 back and forth conversations about that. And I'll tell the salesperson up front, I don't need to talk about this 5 or 6 times. If you can bring me a deal somewhat in this price, if it is possible for you, then we can do this and I will sign this thing today, right? But if you come back with weird ass numbers, I do not want to sit here and I will go somewhere else.
Because you already know what the decision should basically be.
Yes.
And I think that's what's really important, because if you already know what the decision is, that changes how you negotiate, period. Right? So I do suggest in a lot of cases, there's a difference between a meeting that's set to set the terms of a partnership versus an understanding of where is partnership going versus even taking the meeting to begin with.
Yeah. Like I'll take conversation meetings all the time to get a feel for like person and its setup and everything else. And then I'll make a consideration on whether or not I want to work with that person, right? And while time is super valuable, I'd rather not charge to find out how someone is. Because it changes the entire paradigm of like how that relationship's going to go.
Right, absolutely. When they're paying as a client.
Yeah. If they're paying as a client, then there's a whole expectation of like service rendered and like, yes, this will go somewhere. Wait, one thing I'm curious about, AC goes, one thing I'm curious about, which is slightly irrelevant.
We're talking about cars.
So now maybe but either way, Steven is great at making anything relevant to the topic.
That's pretty awesome. So actually, I mean, I think though not, because in this particular case, the cars were just being used as a framework to understand how you were strategically making your decision here in the purchase of the car versus just going out and going shopping. Because what happens when you go shopping for cars is that you're going to have an emotional response.
Yeah.
So from a sales perspective, buying is made on an emotional response and validated with analytical reasoning.
Yes. For me.
For everybody.
Right.
Buying is an emotional thing.
But sometimes the research just needs to be, is this car cool? Cool, I'll do whatever I need to get into this car.
But there's no such thing as this car is cool from an analytical perspective. It's an emotional response.
Well, yeah, of course there's emotional response.
Right.
But
So you have the emotional response that, hey, I want to get this car, and then all of a sudden you go back and you have to ride that emotional decision, and you have to couple it with an analytical decision. And if you don't, what'll happen is that you get some severe fucking buyer remorse when you get home, and you start thinking like, oh my God, this doesn't fit my budget. This doesn't actually do this, that. Because a lot of times we'll buy the smell of the car, right? We'll buy the sizzle.
Oh, yeah.
And that goes the exact opposite on the sales side. So on the sales side, it is important to elicit the emotional response because that's where they're buying from. You can't just walk up and talk about the horsepower and all the vehicles unless you know that is a data point that's going to elicit emotional response. So in the case, you probably don't talk about the type of material used in the valve seats of the cylinder head unless you're talking about a high-end sports car to a car person, and you know that person's gonna be like, oh my God, I'm gonna get the best, and I'm gonna get, right? Their blood pressure is gonna go up, their heart rate's gonna go up, they're gonna get excited. And what's up, Jason Croft?
So Ace goes, he said, so this was the question to make relevant. What was getting your driver's license like, and did you have a good instructor examiner, pass first go, or take a few tries? So funny enough how that's related to strategic planning, I actually I passed my driver's test the first time, right? But that's because I also went into my driver's license thing the same way I went with everything, right? I studied, the whole driving manual, and then I talked to my parents about like how they drive, observed how they drive, how they drove, and then also they had me drive way earlier than when I was actually supposed to get my license. So I was driving for about 3 years before I was old enough to get my license, and there was a lot of practice in there. So like I drove the farm truck, like I drove, like cars, drove stick shifts, like the whole 9 yards. So I was very familiar with it and comfortable, and it was like, okay, what are the rules? And then inside of those rules, you just follow them. It actually, now the craziest thing that I actually realized in retrospect, one of the reasons why I was able to pass the first time and like ingest all the rules of what I'm supposed to do and follow them, was because I actually didn't learn to drive first. Like it wasn't the first vehicle I learned to operate. I learned to fly before I learned how to drive. So
Are you a private pilot?
So I got my license when I was 12.
Awesome.
Because that was back when you actually still could as a kid, and so like there was a program over at what's now Executive Airport down in
Redbird.
Yeah, it used to be Redbird Airport, and those Southwest Airlines had it. It's called the Bronze Eagles, and they took a bunch of kids from different high schools, and they were putting them into this program to teach them how to fly planes. I don't remember exactly how my parents found out about this, but basically we met one of the pilots that was a sponsor of it, and then he was like, oh, you should be part of this. I know it was supposed to be for seniors in high school, but they're like, well, your kid knows about this stuff, so like go through it. So I was the youngest kid in the program, but I had already gone through ground school and a bunch of other stuff. So they were learning things that I was like, well, I know this part.
So I think what's important here is that to be strategic, I think putting time is important until you really have an experience of doing this, because what people tend to do is they tend to, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it a lot too, I'm not saying this applies to other people only, and that's why it's really awesome that we check each other, right? Because we can bring in the other side, a non-emotional side to the conversation, which is that I tend to want to do something, and then I'm looking out in the world to find things that'll validate that desire of mine, and immediately I may want to hop on it versus taking a step back and doing this process of, is this really moving me forward? Is this just something I'm going to like for today? Is this da-da-da-da-da? And then thinking through the ramifications of it. And I think what's really important is that understanding of what is the ramification of this decision to the next decision, to the next one, right?
Yes.
And taking a step back, and then all of a sudden you are much more in control. Well, I mean, as though we have any control, right? But we are a little bit more active participants in being intentional about what's happening in our lives, rather than just going from emotional decision to emotional decision to emotional decision, which means we're it's kind of, we're always living in the moment in a sense, YOLO, that stuff. But at the same time, we're going to live in the moment of tomorrow, and tomorrow is predicated on what happens today.
So one of the reasons for me that like it's not, I seem so dispassionate about a lot of stuff.
So hold on, this is a really good comment. Stephen is like a mobile Stephen Hawking.
Oh my God, that would be great. Yeah. Except for, I would like to be
That's so funny.
I'd like to be less of an asshole.
You do?
Yeah, Stephen Hawking was an interesting person when it came to his interpersonal relationships. Like, he was really, really smart, but like to a detrimental degree. Like, he had 3 different wives.
There's a lot of really nice party guys that have 3 different wives. I don't know.
Yeah, except for he like he's just switched them like clothes. Like, and it was like, well, it's not even so much like, it was just like he would drop someone mentally and not do the interpersonal work to like break the relationship. So basically he cheated on 3 different people, and it's like, his brain just wasn't there when it came
in
to
that area.
Yeah, so I was like, I need to, actually that's one of the reasons why it's like I worked really hard on figuring out that part of how people interact, because I didn't understand it initially. Like, I used to be a really, really angry person because I didn't understand my own emotions, and it just made me pissed off. So then once I was like, okay, I need to conquer this thing because I can't accomplish anything just in this constant state of
So
being
you
mad.
went to actually understand your emotions, period.
Well, yeah, what was causing me to feel all of these different things?
It's pretty strategic of you.
Understanding it so I can get something done and not be taken advantage of, and then learning how to
So
apply
do you
decision-making.
think that introspection has allowed you to actually play out strategy
Yes.
better, and why?
Yes. Because it helps you do internal modeling. So it's thought exercise, constant thought exercise. And a lot of it, I would say I probably pulled some of this from like reading a lot of science fiction when I was a kid, but science fiction is a thought exercise in the what if, right? So if you start asking yourself, what if X happened? How would I respond to it? even if you've never experienced it before, you can do some research and come up with somewhat of a game plan so that then when it happens, you at least have something to go on and to balance against, right? You're not just like, well, I don't know if this decision is better than that decision. I've never gamed it out. I don't even know if someone else tried this before and screwed up, right? Like, and then growing up in a very, evangelical Christian family, the biggest thing during the 90s and early 2000s was like drugs. Like everyone be worried about drugs. You should, it's terrible. People will try to get you hooked on it and everything else. So my thought process was I should learn about these drug things so I can figure out how I actually need to be interacting with them. And you know what I found out? No one gives you drugs when you're a kid. No one gives away drugs for free. They're expensive. So I went through all of high school and most of college before I met old stoners that were like, hey, by the way, here's some free, because they just had extra, right? But I was prepared as a 13-year-old. When weed does this to you, and I need to understand these effects, right? And then it just never materialized. It's very annoying.
I'm glad you're not hooked on crack.
Well, yeah, of course. But I'm just saying, there's all of that was the pre-ingesting and making a plan. But I also decided that I really never wanted to. I was there are certain drugs that I've read their effects. I've seen what happens to people. You could never trick me into using.
So you do something that I do also that I read a book on called Faster, Smarter. I think Faster, Smarter, Better. By let me go grab the name of the book. His name is Charles, and I can never say his last name. Faster, Smarter, Charles, I believe. Yep, here we go. Let me find this book for you guys. I'm gonna drop it here. This book is amazing. I actually extremely love this book, and the reason is that this particular book teaches. It's like one of the Malcolm Gladwell books in the sense that it's researched material that's presented into the form of a book, rather than his opinions on things, right? So in this particular book, he describes something called mental modeling.
Yep.
And that was he said they did the study of these companies, and they were finding that some of the most successful managers, they had the ability to do this thing called mental modeling, which was really weird when I first heard it, because I didn't know everybody doesn't do this, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I thought everybody does this, right? Which is you can visualize and model the outcomes to all of the different scenarios. Well, not all of them, right?
But,
You're not a supercomputer.
enough of them, yeah.
You can visualize what would happen, right? And so that visualization actually allows you to be prepared ahead of time. So there's this, the science behind that, the neuroscience behind that is this. Your brain doesn't know the difference between things that you imagine and things that are happening for real. So if you can imagine yourself, for example, giving a public speech and see and how it would feel like, and how the prep would feel like, and what it would feel like, for example, to hold a microphone in your hand, all of those things, your brain is actually, it's as though it's actually happening live for you, right? And so you start preparing yourself, and then you can start making changes. And by the time you show up in the event, you've already done the event. Your body has already physically done the event.
So that is also what a lot of high performers do. So pro athletes,
all of them do this.
Yes,
I'm sure of it.
They go through and they're like, okay, if I have to go jump hurdles, what does this track look like? Oh, it's got these curves. Okay, we're going to do this. All right, I think I'll make these decisions, and then you're using that against your actual live reactions based on your feedback, right? That's one of the reasons why you go and study. If you're doing race car driving, you study the track first. You study the turns, right? And all this, you don't drive it. You just look at it and say, okay, this turn is this. It's got this bank. It's got this type of degree of attack. I can get in and out at this point. Someone else is driven at this speed. All right, cool. With all of that information and the memory of what that track is supposed to be like, then you the numbers on all the turns, and then you get in the car and then you do the practice lap to say, okay, how does this match up to my mental model? And then you run that a few times before you actually have to drive it.
So there's this new documentary on Netflix. It's called F1. It's 10 episodes, and it covers the 2018 Formula One seasons. It's an awesome show because it's not just about the racing part of it. It's more about the story of the people behind it.
Did Lewis Hamilton win that season?
Yes, 5-time world champ.
Yeah, like that. But he's been driving since he was a child.
I can't believe it. And he was he's a brown dude.
And you know the story about him and his brother, right?
No.
So his brother's disabled, and his brother races funny cars. It's like rally cars. His brother races rally cars, but both of them have been driving since they were kids, and that's kind of like their bond. Like they both drive.
Amazing,
But yeah.
amazing driver, right? 5-time world champ, and I think in a row.
Yeah.
And he drives, I think, for Mercedes.
Yeah, he's a Mercedes driver. Yeah.
So in that show, right, you're seeing people, and there was one particular guy, and I want to say he was from Spain. He drives on like the PS3 or PS4 now,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
PlayStation.
like Forza, yeah.
So you can actually run the
Yes,
tracks, and
yes.
apparently very accurate,
Very
stupid
So
accurate.
Gran Turismo was known for being hyper realistic when it came to the car models and simulations, and then also the track layout. And so like you could use that for training, and you get kind of a feel of what the track would be from just like the process of going through it. And then obviously like sitting in a car is completely different, but it is good to like just get the memory down, and you're like, oh, I've seen that tree, I've seen that sign, I know this turn. Cool, I can then. Part of your brain is almost on autopilot at that point, and now you're just reading the feel of the car, road, and throttle.
That's exactly what it is. So all of a sudden, what happens is that's how. So these guys were also closing. He closed his eyes and he was sitting in this. I mean, it was not even hyper accurate as far as a simulate a rig, right?
Yeah.
It was just a chair and had a wheel in front of him and didn't even have pedals.
Right.
Just the place to put your feet. And he closed his eyes and he was talking himself through the race. Mm-hmm. So all of that is preparing himself for the future event.
Yep.
So nothing becomes a surprise. And so going back through strategic planning and planning in general, it's that ability to close your eyes and imagine what would happen and what it's going to feel like and what would be, you know, and I'm not about imagining all the negatives, but I think there is a time to specifically, intentionally talk about or think about what could potentially happen. So I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. Today, like we said at the very beginning of the show, there should be a storm that hits Dallas, a significant sized storm that hits Dallas, right? So knowing that that's going to happen at 4 o'clock and we can get baseball to softball size hail, ice balls shooting down on our house, what could happen? I don't think that's going to destroy the house,
Right.
but there is the possibility that it punctures a hole in the roof, right? It's a possibility that it breaks the windows.
Yep.
Most likely, not the siding, but the windows, right? And of course, the next level to that is it can potentially knock out the power.
Yeah.
Okay. So knowing those things ahead of time, I've already visualized in my mind this morning what would happen. So if a window broke, what's going to happen? Right? It means water's going to be pouring in the house from that section of the house. If the roof caves in, or the roof as a whole, what's going to happen there? We're going to have a leak upstairs, right? Simple stuff like that. So I'm not going to get caught off guard.
Right.
You know, I could get caught off guard if the house was blown apart, or there was a tornado that seriously damages the house and we're trapped inside of it. So I've actually gone through those exercises in my mind already and created solutions for those. So in a sense, all of a sudden somebody could say, man, you were so lucky. It's like, but I actually planned this. I specifically planned this scenario out, and I was aware of it ahead of time, and so I wasn't going to get caught off guard.
Right.
And I think that's really important. I think that could be some way to look at strategic planning, is that it's imagining what all the different cases would be. And if you are not really amazing at this, what I would really suggest...
Playing video games.
You keep on saying that, so talk about that.
So strategic planning in business mirrors strategic planning for in like certain strategic planning for like real-time strategy games, right? So I've played those basically ever since I had a computer. Like I think the first game I got was like Command and Conquer 1, so this is like late 90s. But what it does is it gives you like a set of resources you have to use, and it gives you an objective, and you have to accomplish that objective, and then you have to find what has been put into the game as your obstacles, right? But one of the key pieces of strategic games is fog of war. You do not know what's outside. Like you don't know they have this many whatever, the enemy has this many, units over here, and so maybe it's easier for me to sneak around the back because I know they're all over here. You don't know where they're at. So part of the first thing you have to do is scout. You have to go find information, and then you have to say, okay, if my plan was to build 50 of whatever I'm building and then send them at the enemy, is that enough now that I've scouted the positions and figured it out? And then let's just say that the game throws a curve at you, and it's surprised there was actually 150. So now you need 3 times as much. What playing the game does is let you go through that scenario over and over again and understand like what worked and what didn't. It's the whole modeling piece. And then like, did I plan my resources correctly? Did I run out of, building materials before I was able to complete this? And then does that ruin the whole entire game? Does it just make it longer? Like, it's the whole question back and forth. And there are, especially now that games are very prevalent, there's games around specific activities, right? So like the one that popped up on Facebook that kind of took over, a couple years ago is Farmville, right? It's a real simple game about putting plants on the ground and farming, but it's a resource management activity.
Okay, so I have a question. Is there any game that teaches strategy versus strategy being a byproduct of what happens? Does that make sense?
Specifically teaches strategy.
So in this scenario, we're going to learn this lesson, or this is the lesson that you'll get out of this scenario, and you run it until you win, and then it kind of keeps on dropping you hints like, well, right, and then you go to the next scenario. Because the reason I'm asking is because there's a series of different books specifically written to influence and strategy. So one of them is a writer called Robert Cialdini, and he writes books around tech problem. I think our battery died. Yep. So just give it, Steven. I can talk for a second. So one of them is written around the concept of influence, and his not one. That's what he writes about is this stuff, right? So when you look at how to interact with another individual, an understanding of influence is really important, right? But then you have books written by Robert Greene, which are like the 48 Laws of War or strategy.
So those are written specifically because most adults don't learn the same way, or they don't learn as fluidly as children do, right? And so one of the things that gaming and play does is it lets you learn a concept fluently without specifically teaching it to you. But every game they do have a lot of elements that will teach you specific pieces, but it's usually geared toward winning the game, right? Like it's like, here's how you build your resources so that you have enough to go do this other thing. So there's nothing specifically that teaches that, but there are a lot of ways of simulating some of those activities and then putting them into context that will then like be helpful understanding things like Robert Cialdini's book. So remember your Roller Coaster Tycoon? So that was another game that was made in the 90s, and that was 2000, 2001, yeah. It was a simulator of building a theme park.
It was a simulator of building a theme park. Wow, okay.
So you had to design rides and pick attractions and set up prices, and your goal was to make X amount of money over a certain amount of time inside of your park.
Okay.
And you had to keep the people in the park happy, right? So that's probably the closest like straight running a business type simulator that I remember seeing out there. And that has specific lessons of like, this is what you need to do to accomplish this. But a lot of it is like learning by doing, and it's implied. It's not like a hardcore like, this is going to be strategic planning 101 for business.
Right, that's what Ace Platinum's saying here is a lot of video games are subtly educational and strategic.
Yep. Yes.
And so I'm wondering about
which is why it takes more. Like it actually sinks in deeper because it becomes something that you just is part of you. It's not I learned this thing and then I forget, because everyone in school.
Okay, hold on a second though. I'm wondering about that because there's a game called Go.
Yep.
Right, and then there's a game which have you played that game before?
Played Go?
Go.
Yeah, 1 or 2 times I got killed.
What? One or two times and you got killed. Okay.
Yeah. Like
so basically we're both beginners.
I haven't made a study of it, yeah.
So I have the game, I have the board, and I have the book. So we should actually go through it because I think that'd be an awesome game. So chess is known as a strategic game.
Yes.
Go is known as a strategic game, and I think even harder than chess from a strategic perspective. And there's a whole show, I think on Amazon Prime or on Netflix around Go. The documentary. Is it AlphaGo or?
Yeah, it's a documentary about the AI that they created.
But what's the name of the documentary? Do you remember? Was it AlphaGo or just Go? I think it's AlphaGo. I think the name of the AI that they created.
Yeah, AlphaGo is the name of the program. So
it's an awesome show, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, you could play Go and you could play chess and you will learn strategy. Yes? But you can also take specific classes to learn strategic.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to say. And I think a intentional study of strategy is what I'm interested in, and that's what I've done recently, and I want to I've done it in the past, and I want to actually spend probably the next 5 or 6 years really focusing in on a few topics, and that's one of the topics, because I think in the consulting work that we do and the consulting work that I specifically want to do, it is around strategy. It is around if an individual is leading a company division or is the head of a company, how are they specifically aligning themselves, right, to what's going on in the marketplace, or how are they looking to partner with a different company? What are the different strategic options that they have available to them, and so forth?
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that's super exciting to me. So again, the Art of War is a strategy book. The 33 Laws or 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene, the 48 Laws of Power, The Art of Seduction. These are all books that specifically teach to the tactics and the strategy elements versus I'm figuring it out.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking like a game that would actually allow you to role model or role play these things would be really awesome. Here's a great comment. I was asking about my driving. Well, I actually did really well because I wanted to pass. So I strategically was not so left foot. But the problem that I experienced in the past, and I still experience sometimes, is I think I know it all, or I think I know enough to move forward. And sometimes that would result in me getting in trouble. So speaking of strategic games, what about The Game? Have you ever played that before? LOL. If you haven't heard of it, Google it. It's actually the most underrated thing I've ever heard of in my life, and I'm laughing thinking about it right now. Do you know about that? Can you drop a link to that specific one? Speaking of strategic stuff, I have read a book called The Game. It's by a guy named Neil Strauss, and that's a really interesting book around dating. But I think for me, it was really, there were so many lessons about self-esteem and presenting yourself around other people that I took from the book, rather than trying to figure out how to take someone to bed, which is what other people seem to get from the book sometimes, or at least by the topic. And that's not what I don't think the intention was at all for people that are understanding that space. So.
I mean, I do feel like partially that was the intention, but it's...
Well, that particular book, no, but yes, people specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, some people will do that. But the problem is that that's wearing a mask. And anytime that you wear a mask,
right,
then you're not authentic and nothing is going to last for very long. And basically you just become a fraud.
Yeah. A lot of the pickup artist space is focused on teaching people that have never thought about how to intentionally elicit responses, desired responses from people, how to go through that process. And that's really, like, at the end of the day, if you don't want to be the person that everyone's like, hey, that weirdo over here is here, you need to study, like, what are people's reactions? What is the audience? Read my audience. Is this a group of people that thinks like, okay, all the norms are these standard, paradigms, and so I should fit into that if I want to, like, insinuate myself into that circle? Or is it a bunch of non-standard thinkers that are like, yeah, the weirder the better, everything is cool, please bring something new and interesting to this? It's all different types of responses, and your actions can elicit positive or negative. But you got to know what you're going into.
That's
like I would never try to work in an accounting firm.
Why?
Because working in an accounting firm doesn't fit with the way that I want to exist in the world. And so therefore, like, what I would need to do to fit well into that space would also be at odds with how I want to be. So I wouldn't be able to wear that mask too long.
Awesome. So I'm going to drop a little hint. So that's the book.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I know what Ace is talking about. So it's a game where the point of the game is to not think about the game. So as soon as you are thinking, when you think about it, you've lost it.
One more time. Okay, that's pretty awesome. Hold on, because that is actually a really deep consciousness exercise.
Yes.
Because the whole point of being conscious or being aware of where you're at or being present is that you no longer think about that, in a sense, right? You only notice when you're not present.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're being present. And so what that means is that in the case of walking down the street, if we're judging things or we're putting labels on things and we're pondering all of these other things that are happening, rather than, I feel the floor beneath my feet, I hear sound, I don't have to think about what's going to happen next. I just see cars moving. I don't have to imagine, are they going to hit each other? Are they going to break, right? So that's really interesting, because that sounds like a massive, like, deep dive into consciousness in itself. Or mindfulness, which is the opposite of, you're not supposed to have any, your mind should be not full, so it's not mindful. But
Wait, what?
Mindfulness implies that your mind is full, of course.
Right.
But you're emptying the thoughts from your mind, you're being present 100%.
See,
it's not mind emptiness.
That's
so the easier one is to be just being present.
That's interesting, because like I've always had an interesting struggle with the concept of being present.
Because your ego.
No, not so much from the ego. I know for me personally, The idea of being present, as most people talk about it, is actually the idea of being intentional and being focused. Which, when most people describe being present, which is, empty your mind and just exist in this moment, in my paradigm, that means that I'm not planning. And if I'm not planning, that means that when I'm out of this moment, the next moment could blindside me.
Okay, so I think what I understand, right? I don't perceive conscious being present. By the way, we're going to a 1-week retreat with Eckhart Tolle in September, so I'm super excited because I have some really interesting, well, for me, they've been really challenging questions. I'm excited to have those conversations with him. But I think there's a difference between intentionally sitting down to plan versus consistently planning at all times in your mind. Does that make sense?
Yes, but that's because of very specific things.
That you didn't even say anything right there. What did you mean?
So specifically, some people's brain chemistry is set up that they always have that capacity, and turning it off then incapacitates them.
It doesn't incapacitate you. So what you're doing literally is you are living in the future because you're consistently planning for things that are going to reside in the future.
Yep.
Yet you live in the present. So you actually physically force your...
I exist in the present.
Well, whatever. This is where you are right this second.
Yep.
The next second is not guaranteed to you. But if your mind is always in the future, then you are not here, which is the moment that you're actually living.
How much of your mind is in the future?
It depends. That's up to you to figure out.
Right. But that is the reason why, mindfulness, as is expressed a lot of times, or being present expressed a lot of times, is expressed as an absolute.
And that's what I'm saying. I don't know because we're humans.
Right.
How did we invent anything if we were not going into the future to mental model, to imagine something, to think about the problems of situations, right? Right? So constantly wondering the same questions, like, what is the difference here? Is it that we're leaving being present, or is it the fact that we are intentional about that moment rather than, so I'm going to bed?
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I trying to do when I'm going to bed?
Sleep.
This motherfucker whoop, goes off crazy.
Right. That's not helpful.
Right. So here I am, and I'm literally, now I'm like, okay, I'm going to just, even though you're not supposed to meditate, I'm just like, I'm not going to meditate, I'm just going to come back to the present, right? So guess what happens when I'm coming back to the present moment? I start thinking about being in the present moment, and then before you know it, I'm like, minutes later, I'm sure, or seconds later, I'm like, God dang it, I went all the way off to somewhere else again. Come back. We intentionally, I will speak for myself. Even though I'm aware of this, I actually have a hard time coming back to the present moment very often. Even though I know that is, I'm laying in bed, like I have no other reason than I need to go to sleep, right? Or I'm in the shower and I enjoy, the hot water and all that stuff, and I'm like, it's relaxing. And then it doesn't become relax mode. It becomes, I'm here to think about business, or I'm here to worry about this and wondering when I should pick up my lift. So these are all things that could happen in the microseconds after the shower when I'm like, okay, now how's my day gonna go? Boom, boom, boom. And sorry, one more thing before I lose this train of thought. One thing I've heard is that as we relax our mind, right, and we relax our body, we get to a more calm state, we're able to tune in things that are outside of us, right? So that's why the shower is where people pick up a lot of their ideas.
Right, because something externally is relaxing.
Yeah, we're relaxed. We're in a more relaxed state, so we're more open. We're actually sometimes a little bit more present because sometimes we can go in that autopilot mode of we're just washing our hair, washing our body. We almost kind of get into a tiny bit of a meditative state, right? And all of a sudden, we're open to receive the thoughts, different thoughts, or our mind is able to latch onto a thought. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, that totally makes sense because I was going to say that I feel like in the moments that most people deem being present, I'm actually putting myself into a semi-meditative state.
That is why I'm asking the question why I have a question is, right, if being in meditation and actually being able to be present in meditation, not, thinking about thoughts and whatever, right? If that happens when you're sitting down or lying down and your eyes are closed and whatnot, what does that mean when we're walking around, which is the vast majority of our day? How do we bring more of that strength and those elements into our waking day, walking around moments? Because otherwise it's like, okay, I'm in this state, I'm in tune with source, I'm allowing myself to receive thoughts and ideas that may be, or I'm not sourcing, right? But that's only for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes? That's in a pretty amazing state. versus all of the other time when we're running around like our head cut off, not being intentional, running on autopilot, running different habits and routines.
See, that's where it's weird.
This gets kind of tricky.
Well, I was gonna say, that's where it's weird for me because I am mostly in a state of intentionality.
I don't know what your mind is, so I can't describe whether I
Right,
can't give you any feedback on that.
Right. I'm just saying, I know for myself, like most people are like, everything's like been pulling me in all different directions, and I'm like, I know like internally, whenever I get new input, like I have almost like an auto hold mode. So something new comes in, some idea, and I'm like, cool, put that in holding. We will process this. Right? So like walking down the street, someone steps out in front of me and it's like, oh, what just happened? Okay, let's process this, right? The emotions, reaction, everything else, all of that stuff is on hold to then say, okay, what actually just happened? Cool, blah, blah, observe, move on.
It's quite stoic of you.
Yeah. So then when new ideas are pouring in, people are talking about stuff, like I'm just in process mode. I'm like, okay, hold, examine, and now, figure out, okay, does this relate to anything that I already know about? Do I care? This part of the strategic plan, blah, blah, and then process that through. But that's also a result of the whole ADHD thing.
That's interesting.
Because for me, I have multiple channels of processing happening. So if I speak about something, if someone says, oh, here's this thing, and they're like, oh, you process that very fast. That's because like a bunch of other resources turned on and said, yes, no, does this relate to something we already have? Cool. If not, if it relates to nothing, ooh, that might be new and interesting. Let's ingest it. Right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, yes, this checks to something that we already know. Cool. Let's speak about it or not speak about it. Or is that a data point that can be added to previous knowledge?
Love it. Well, we ran a little bit late.
Yeah. What time is it?
So this was awesome. Thanks a lot, Stephen, for your insight, your geniusness. Thanks for those individuals that were watching and the questions that we had. We had some great questions both on Facebook and on Twitch. Thanks for the feedback for everybody. We dropped all the links I think we spoke about have been dropped into both Facebook and Twitch. I'm dropping a link here at the end that's going to be the game as I guess the mind game, right? That game that's on Wikipedia, so it describes that. So I think we have it all there. So our website address is thekineticexperience.com. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram. For those that are on Twitch, you'll see all the different links to all our different channels and our personal links there. And on YouTube, you'll find not only snippets of these shows and the different stuff we've done like this, but we also have our Becoming Da Vinci show, which is our podcast covering the life of Leonardo da Vinci, not from a historical perspective, because you can read some great books on him, but really looking at his life and the traits that he exhibited, like curiosity and imagination and being a self-directed learner and being a misfit, being a rebel, and applying that to individuals today that are doing an amazing job in their craft or in how they're changing the world, or just some epic people that we really look up to. So that's what we also cover on YouTube. So thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Abe Nadimi.
Oh, and I'm Stephen Ellis.
There we go.
And we're out.
And we're out.
Yeah.